Stone Brothers production.
Hello, welcome back to this serial killer series. Sorry for my almost 2-month break from this series. I am back now, so let's get right back into this. This episode will be about 6 serial killers in Connecticut, so let's begin. Number 6. Emmanuel Webb, aka the Bridgeport Killer. I couldn't find much about Webb's early life, but he was suspected in up to 10 Bridgeport murders. A special homicide task force was formed in Bridgeport in 1994 after several women were found dead in vacant buildings and lots in the city's East End. Police at the time called the unknown suspect as East End Killer. Webb moved back to Mount Vernon, Georgia, where his family had lived previously in August 1993. Once arrested, Webb was charged with 1 count of murder in the killing of 34-year-old Elizabeth Gandy on April 19, 1993. He was also charged in the July 1994 murder of Evelyn Charity, who was sexually assaulted and strangled. Webb later pleaded guilty to reduced charges of involuntary manslaughter, robbery, and motor vehicle theft, and received a 20-year prison sentence before being released on parole in late 2001. 2 members of the cold case unit in Bridgeport found 10 of the killings had similarities when they looked at the case in the 2000s. Those detectives sent evidence for 4 linked homicide cases to the FBI so that they can compare DNA sample profiles of convicted felons in a DNA identification system in the 2000s. All 4 cases had a hit on Emmanuel Webb, with 4 of the victims being Gandy, Sharon Cunningham, Minnie Sutton, and Sheila Etheridge. Police said they found sperm evidence involving Cunningham and Etheridge, a cigarette butt at the site of Sutton's killing, and skin of Webb under Gandy's fingernails. He pleaded guilty to more murders in May of 2008 for 3 more women and was sentenced to 60 years in prison in Connecticut on June 23, 2008. Number 5. Benjamin Franklin Miller, Jr. Miller was a white postal worker who claimed to be an ordained minister. He spent a great deal of his time preaching to African American pedestrians on the street corners of Stamford, especially to prostitutes who worked there. He had a history of mental illness and had been hospitalized at Fairfield Hills State Hospital as early as 1953. Miller first came to the attention of police for his first murder of Roselle Rush, who was a young black woman and was found at the scene with strangle marks on her neck, which seemed to be that of a bra strap. Her body was found near Riverbank Road in a wooded area of Merritt Parkway in Stamford. Similarly, Donna Roberts and Gloria Kahn, who were also African American women, also died in the same way and discovered in the same vicinity as Rush. At this time, cops did not know who the suspect was until Reverend James Miller of Stamford reported receiving anonymous telephone calls in 1969 of April from someone having the voice of a black male, describing the location of an as-yet unfound body and expressing a wish that the deceased woman receive a Christian burial. Police then took this hint of a caller that was that of a clergyman, so they searched the databases to a list of all clergymen in the area, and they included Miller's name on there, thinking he may be the prime suspect in the murders. After 3 more murders that had taken place was when they decided to interview everyone, including one receiving the call. At first they never thought of nothing was up, until it was his turn to be interviewed, and him avoiding the interview for church work seemed suspicious to them. On July 10th and August 11th, 1971, the strangled bodies of Gail Thompson and Alma Henry, respectively, were found in the same area of the past victims of Rush, Roberts, and Kahn had been found. Investigators finally has had enough, in spite of publicity of the murders of the African American woman. By 1972, they had a special team of state and local police detectives assigned with the cases on a full-time basis. They caught a break and learned that Miller had suspicious activities in the past, and found out that his psychiatric records and his trouble with yelling and preaching hate towards the working black woman. Miller then became interrogated constantly by the cops, getting answers like him having sex with the victims but not killing them. They found that even more suspicious because of her not having any recent forced sexual contact before her death. The polygraph test helped the investigators in the end, showing him lying even about the ways the women were strangled with a handkerchief and not a brassiere. In the end, Miller confessed to the murders. Psychiatrists found out that he had been suffering from chronic, undifferentiated schizophrenia and placed him on the suicide watch while in custody. Miller became under arrest on March 17, 1972, and on May 15th, he was indicted for the murders of Rush, Roberts, Kahn, Thompson, and Henry, even though he had confessed to the killings of a few others. He was sentenced to 25 years and was exonerated in 1989 after a judge dismissed the case, ruling that the second trial would constitute double jeopardy, and Miller was released. However, he was immediately voluntarily recommitted to a mental institution after his lawyer said that his long confinement kept him unprepared to live on his own. Number 4. Amy Archer Gilligan. Not much is known about Amy's life before 1901, when she opened a home for the elderly in Windsor, Connecticut, and was claimed by some that her business was the first for-profit nursing homes in the United States at the time. Amy is the 8th of 10 children. She married James Archer in 1897 and had a daughter, Mary J. Archer, which was born in December 1897. Amy and her family got their first job as caretakers in 1901 to John Seymour, an elderly widower, and they settled into his home at Newington, Connecticut. Seymour died in 1904, and they soon converted the home into a boarding house for the elderly, which they allowed the Archers to stay. They provided to the elderly with a fee, and in turn paid rent to Seymour's family to stay there, and ran the house under the name Sister Amy's Nursing Home for the Elderly. In 1907, Seymour's family decided to sell the home, but Amy's family moved to Windsor, Connecticut, and used their savings to purchase a place of their own to run a residence called Archer's Home for the Elderly and Infirm. Amy's husband, James Archer, died supposedly to natural causes, but the official cause of death was some generic kidney disease. She took out an insurance policy a few weeks before his death, so she can continue running Archer's home. In 1913, Amy married her second husband, Michael Gilligan, which was a widower with 4 adult sons. He was reportedly wealthy and interested in both Amy and the investing in Archer's home healthcare business. Michael died a year later, and the official cause of death was severe indigestion. Amy was once again financially secure because of the husband leaving all his estates and his will to her. Between 1907 and 1917, there were 60 deaths in the Archer's home. Relatives believe that their clients grown suspicious as the tally of large numbers dying in the residency. Only 12 had died between 1907 and 1910. 48 died between 1911 and 1916. And among them, Franklin Andrews was apparently healthy. Andrews died in May of 1914, and he was gardening, and all of a sudden he collapsed, and died quickly after that in the evening. His sister inherited his personal papers, and mentioned Amy was pressuring her brother for money, in which he died soon after he gave a large sum of money to her. Andrew's sister Pierce took a suspicion of the place being a murder house and took her story to a local newspaper company that made several articles calling it the murder factory. Police started seriously investigating the cases there and took a year to complete investigating the bodies of Gilligan, Andrews, and 3 other people living in her care. They found out that all 5 people exhumed were poisoned, and finding out after getting testimonies from local merchants saying she purchased large amounts of arsenic to supposedly kill rats. Also, police found out that she forged her handwriting for Gilligan's will. Amy was arrested and tried for 5 counts of murder, but ultimately her lawyer managed to get the charges reduced to a single count of murder for Andrew's death, and jury found her guilty and she was sentenced to death. She appealed and was granted a retrial in 1919. She pleaded insanity while her daughter Mary said that her mother was addicted to morphine. Amy was nonetheless found guilty on second-degree murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment. In 1924, Amy was declared temporarily insane and was transferred to a Connecticut hospital for the insane in Middletown, where she stayed until her death on April 23, 1962. Number 3. Lydia Sherman, aka Derby Poisoner. Lydia was thought of being one of the most cold-hearted and successful poisoners come out of the 19th century of America. It begins in the early 1860s. Sherman was married, ironically enough, to a police officer named Edward Struck. Edward and Lydia had 6 children, and to Lydia, it was becoming all too much for her to handle. She decided to put an end to having any more pregnancies, and Lydia found a chemist and bought some rat poison. She had the feeling she can make some money off the killing of her husband for a modest sum of money. The murder worked with poison, and her husband died quickly, and no one suspected anything foul. Soon after, she murdered all her 6 children with the same method, leaving her rich and free. Lydia was a quite skilled actress to hide her sadistic happiness with fake sorrow, and people thought of her being a poor widow. Later on in 1868, Lydia married Dennis Herbert, who was a fairly rich farmer from New Haven, Connecticut. People often refer to him being senile. By 2 years later, in 1870, Lydia was only a widow again, but got most of Dennis's estate. Later in April 1870, Lydia got a job as a housekeeper to Nelson Sherman, who, having lost his wife, needed someone to look after his baby son and 14-year-old daughter. Lydia and Nelson grew pretty close, and finally agreed to marrying her. Lydia decided to show her gratitude in a sinister way by poisoning his 2 kids with arsenic. Nelson was stricken with the grief of the loss of his children. He soon after died to poisoned hot chocolate drink on the 12th of May, 1871. Lydia was not so lucky this time. A local doctor, Beardsley, became suspicious of these deaths and ordered a second and third opinion. The doctor's opinion of being poisoned by arsenic were proven true when the bodies were exhumed. The doctor informed the police, but Lydia already fled to New York. The police ordered Lydia to face trial and be extradited back to Connecticut. Lydia was convicted of second-degree murder due to most of the evidence being circumstantial. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, and Lydia died in prison on May 16, 1878. Number 2. Michael Bruce Ross. Michael Ross was born on July 26, 1959, being the firstborn of 4 children to Patricia Lane and Dan Ross in Putnam, Connecticut. Elliot claimed that during Michael's youth there was evidence that his mother, who was filled with psychiatric problems, mentally and physically abusing him. Eventually, the mother was put into psychiatric institutions on 2 separate occasions, and her husband became the primary care on the children. This led on to Mike being sexually abused by his younger uncle who babysat him, and formed a close bond with him, sexually abused him before he committed suicide. Despite Ross's trauma he endured, he managed to excel in school and had a special interest in managing his own farm one day after completing his animal science education. While attending school, he was socially active in many clubs, including the Alpha Zeta fraternity and the Future Farmers of America, where he had several relationships with beautiful young co-eds. His brother Elliot claimed that his brother formed sexually disturbing fantasies that many of his girlfriends could not endure. Soon after, it didn't take long for his fantasies to spiral out of control, and during his second year at school he started to stalk young women. Then he started to rape the young woman he stalked, and it led him to being arrested in September of 1981 after he evaded capture for many years and graduated college. Ross was arrested for kidnapping a 16-year-old girl, dragging her through the woods, gagged her with a handkerchief before police arrived, being charged for unlawful restraint, causing him to undergo probation for 2 years and return back to Connecticut. This is where he led down a path of sadistic rapes that did not stop. First, on January 5, 1982, 17-year-old Tammy Williams disappeared in Brooklyn while walking back from her boyfriend's house, which police investigated and did not have Ross as a suspect yet. During this time, Ross worked at an egg farm while trying to retain his urges and avoiding cops for 3-month time frame, until he showed up and attacked the owner of the place and soon was arrested after the incident. He was bailed out and sent home for a 60-day in-home psychiatric study. Deborah Taylor was next on the chopping list when she was found missing after the husband split up with her while trying to find gas for both cars. Her body was found by a jogger on October 30th, while in the meantime, Ross was serving 4 months for the past assault charges. Ross finally found luck and landed a job with the Connecticut insurance company while not stating his priors when he landed the job. He then killed his own co-worker, Robin Stravinsky, and her body was found by local joggers. On Easter Sunday was the last straw when police found Leslie Shelley and April Burness' bodies in Michael Ross's car was seen at the scene by witness testimonies. They finally found out Michael Ross killed all of the women after tracking him down with a car search of 2,000 subcompact drivers on the list. Ross finally confessed to all of his murders and rapes, showing police where all the bodies were found. Ross stayed in prison for over a quarter of a century before being finally put to death by lethal injection. Number 1. Unidentified Connecticut River Valley Killer. Connecticut River Valley Killer refers to an unidentified possible serial killer responsible for a series of stabbing murders, mostly in and around Claremont, New Hampshire, and Connecticut River Valley from 1978 to 1987. First murdered victim was 27-year-old Kathy Milliken, was found on October 25, 1978 with at least 29 stab wounds and was found only yards away from where she was last seen. Almost 3 years later, on July 25, 1981, 37-year-old Mary Elizabeth Critchley, a student from University of Vermont, vanished near Interstate 91 at the border of Massachusetts and Vermont. She was hitchhiking over there and her body was found off in a wooded area on Unity, New Hampshire. But due to the condition of the body, she was unable to be examined for the cause of death. 16-year-old nurse's aide Bernice Cortimanchi was last seen by her boyfriend's mother in Claremont on May 30, 1984. They thought that she was hitchhiking near New Hampshire Route 12 to see her boyfriend, but was reported missing after not making her destination. She was found nearly 2 years later by a fisherman with stab wounds to the neck and injuries to the head, which is similar to the previous homicide. On July 20, 1984, 27-year-old Ellen Fried was a supervising nurse at a Valley Regional Hospital and made a late-night stop to use a payphone in Claremont. Fried spoke on the phone for nearly an hour before telling the person on the phone that a suspicious vehicle was driving back and forth in her vicinity. She stepped away from the phone to make sure her engine was running in her car to make sure she can make a run for it if the guy pulled up to her. After a few more minutes, she ended the call. She was reported not being at work the next day, and her car was abandoned on Jarvis Road, which was a few minutes away from where she used her payphone. Fried's body was found near the banks of Sugarville, Kellyville, 2 months later, and an autopsy showed the same pattern, multiple stab wounds with possible sexual assault. From 1985 to 1987, several women were found stabbed with a knife in and around Claremont, New Hampshire, and Connecticut River Valley. The killings apparently stopped late in the evening of August 6, 1988, when 22-year-old Jane Borowski was 7 months pregnant, was returning from a county fair in Keene, New Hampshire, when she was stopped at a closed convenience store to purchase a soda from a vending machine. She returned to her car and then noticed a Jeep Wagner parked next to her. Through her rear view mirror, she spotted the driver of the vehicle walking to the back of her vehicle and asked her if their payphone was working, at which he grabbed her right when he said that. Soon after Borowski was struggling, a man accused her of beating up his girlfriend and asked if she had Massachusetts plates on her car. She said she had New Hampshire plates, but this did not ease the attacker, who started to stab her 27 times before driving away and leaving her to bleed out. She managed to make it back in her car and drive towards a friend's house for help. She noticed the attacker was following her and she made it to her friend's house immediately, with her friend helping her right away before the attacker did a slow U-turn and sped off. Borowski was treated at the hospital where it was determined that the attack resulted in a severed jugular vein, 2 collapsed lungs, a kidney laceration, and a severed tendons in her knees and thumb. Fortunately, the baby survived but was diagnosed with mild cerebral palsy because of the injuries she got during that time. She was able to provide authorities a description for a sketch of the suspect and remembered the first 3 characters of the attacker's license. However, the killing stopped soon after Borowski's attack, and the case became cold soon after. They first thought of the suspect being 21-year-old Delbury Tallman because of stabbing and raping a 16-year-old Haiti Martin. He confessed to that murder but recanted his confession and was acquitted. They thought of him being the killer because of living right next to where most of the killings were at, but there is no physical evidence that Tallman was involved in any other of the cases. They thought of 2 other suspects, but subsequently none of them had enough evidence to be considered in the crime, and the Connecticut River Valley killings remain unsolved to this day. I hope you enjoyed the video. Next episode coming up on the list will be Delaware, so stay tuned for that. I will be recording my first time-lapse art piece soon, which will be the new intro video to my videos. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and stay tuned for future videos.